Hello everyone, welcome to this intermediate lute lesson. This time we're going to have a look at Pavan by Alfonso Ferrabosco. This Pavan's a little bit deceptive. It starts off looking like it's going to be quite easy and then very quickly gets fairly advanced. I know this is an intermediate lesson, but I think this piece is actually quite difficult, so we'll work through it in stages. So to begin with, as I say, the piece is quite difficult, so work out a tempo based on a division. So find yourself a little division. Let's say we have a look at the first one. And you think, how fast can I play some of that? Maybe maybe that's my limit, and therefore I need to think about how fast I'm going to play the start. Very tempting to start this sort of piece and think, great, that looks fairly easy, the first couple of bars look okay, and then get into some divisions and get completely stuck or have to slow down to half the tempo. So yeah, find out what tempo you can play it at and start there. I find it really important to always tell my students before this sort of piece as well to imagine themselves playing a couple of the bars, particularly from a slower section before they start playing the piece, just to really understand and grasp the atmosphere that they want to bring. It also helps us to really count at the start. Quite often if we start with a long note, in this case a dotted crotchet, a dotted quarter note here, sometimes it's very easy to rush through that first note, so really take your time with that and enjoy the resonance that you're creating before moving on. Okay? Great, so the first thing I want to look at is bar 5. Here we just have some fairly straightforward chords. So we've just got a bit of C major and a bit of F. And then to G, a little cadence there at the end. It's quite tempting maybe to spread all of these chords, but what I'd suggest is that you don't, because they're not that important. It's maybe nicer to spread on the start of bar 6. It's entirely up to you. Everyone can spread whenever they like, but I would have thought musically it would make sense not to emphasise too many of those chords, and certainly spreading a chord does tend to emphasise it a little bit. So yeah, I'd work through those slowly, try and play them really smoothly, and remember there that the cadence should go strong weak. So we've got tension, release, and we're into the C major with a little extra on the end. Great, okay, so the second section is the first division. This starts on bar 7, and I think the trick about the divisions in this piece is that they arrive very subtly. You don't really get a bit of a warm-up. Quite often with other pieces from the time, you get maybe a couple of chords before things really start to light up and set off. And here you're immediately into it. You're suddenly playing much faster. You're suddenly playing really quick. So be mentally prepared for that, because you could get to the end of the first section and think, that's nice and calm, but you've suddenly got to go, and you really need to be ready for it. So prepare yourself, practice that slowly, because we don't want to arrive and suddenly go, whoa, that's way too quick. So make sure that your fingers are, your both hands are happy and you know where all the notes are. But once you're there, make sure that you're mentally ready to start that section, because there's nothing worse than somebody going, oh yeah, this is faster. I remember how this goes. We've all been there. So I have a look at that bar, and then actually in the next bar we have this rather lovely which feels to me a little bit like a sort of waterfall or something. It's really nice to bring that out and maybe take a tiny bit of time with it. It doesn't need to be huge. Yeah. And the other thing just to watch out about that little sequence is not to get too caught up when you suddenly have to play a bass note. We want it to be fairly simple and straight. Sometimes it's a bit easy to put a huge gap in there whilst we find the bass note. But if you can get that really smooth and you can really tail it off as though you're playing over the edge of a waterfall or something like that, I think that'll come across really well. The last thing that I want to mention in this section, and it's something that we'll come back to, is that when we play fast, I find it particularly useful in the right hand to slightly tense my hand up. And I wouldn't normally recommend that at all on the lute, because I find the lute responds really well if you're quite calm and quite relaxed. But in this particular instance, when you have to play quite fast, and if you're playing with this sort of technique with thumb inside, it can be quite useful to slightly tense the hand, particularly if you're used to the movement coming from the arm, and it'll just allow you to play just that little bit faster. Obviously, there's coordination and everything else to worry about, but it's worth having a little go at that just for the fast sections, and remember to obviously relax after you've done them. So if I give an example, I would probably play, if I play from bar 10, just a little bit slower, I'd probably tense up here, and then relax, and then tense there, then relax. Okay? So it really is only for the tiny gruppy or the little trillos. So really they're small sections where you suddenly maybe put a tiny bit of tension into the hand just to sort of stiffen the response you get from the string as well. And that personally works well for me to play just that little bit faster. The other thing to mention about that is that you really need to play into the string. It's no good tensing up and then playing high off the string and not making enough sound. So it's got to be done in combination. You know, it's got to be on the edge there. You can hear me slightly splatting it just because I'm playing it slightly stronger than I would normally. So if you can get it to that point, it should allow you to just play that tiny bit faster, still with a full tone. Great. So when we get into the next section, the B section of the Pavan, this is bar 13, we get, well, from bar 12, okay, and then it doesn't feel like the divisions have finished. Okay, we suddenly end up playing fast still. And normally in a Pavan that wouldn't happen. Like, it would be the new section and it would be, right, well, this is the slow version and we'll do the divisions afterwards. But interestingly here, we're still playing quite quickly in the first bar. And I think that's really interesting because it doesn't happen very often. So it's worth bringing out a little bit. So maybe when we get to the end of the sort of second A, we can come in with a little bit more energy into the first B, because we've not finished with the divisions. We've still got a bit of energy about us, and we're not quite ready to slow down yet. And then the rest of that section, we've got lots of nice suspensions that are worth holding on to. And then in bar 15 and 16, we have this rhythm. Okay? In those bars, it's really important to make sure that you've got a bit of buoyancy, particularly on their offbeats, effectively. So in the first beat, second beat. I'm exaggerating, but you get the idea. Those notes need to seem long because they're being played next to very short notes. So make sure you hold them for their full value. These are the quarter notes on the second and fourth beats. The other thing about that little section is that it's good to hang on to the bass notes when you need to. So second half of 15, that bass B flat needs to hold all the way to the end of the bar if possible. Good, right, bar 20, that's the beginning of the next section. So it's the division of the B. Now the B started off with a bit of a division, but this particular little section this bar takes it much further. Okay, there's a slow version. Here we need to work out how we're going to finger that in our left hand. We've got to get up the neck somehow. So we're going to have to shift somehow in that passage. You've got a few options. You can either do a sort of extended technique. If you've got big hands, you can get away with it. I can just about get away with that. So that's a sort of extended technique where I'm suddenly playing, instead of having my fingers over effectively 4 frets, they move just that 1 fret wider to accommodate 5. Is that right? Yeah, 5. So you can do it that way, or you can shift. Okay, and then you can shift in. There's a few different ways of doing that shift. You move up on your 3rd here, and back on your 1st, or up on your 1st and back on your 1st. Okay, but bear in mind that the more shifting you do, the more likely that little segment's going to get slightly broken up, and we probably want it to flow through. So the fewer shifts, the better. And if you can do it, as I say, with a slightly extended technique, then I would probably opt for that in this case. As I say, that's probably a more advanced way of playing, but it's definitely worth it here to maintain that sort of smoothness and elegance that you'd probably prefer when playing this sort of piece. So, next section, we'll move on a few bars. So I'm going to have a look at bar 22. The bars get very long at this point because there's loads of notes in them. It's a very good set of divisions, this. Now this B flat needs to be held on to for as long as possible. And that happens in the middle of bar 22. Okay, so if you can hold on to it all the way through to the next bar where you've got a C in the bass, that's ideal. If you can't, just as long as possible. Yeah, and make sure those bass notes come out in this section. There's nothing worse than having these really well played trebles with no bass. Yeah, we really want to hear that bass note each time. Same with that D there, hold on to that, to the C. Okay, great. Which takes us to bar 25. So here, we suddenly have a different rhythm and it's jolly. So I'd bring that out because that's basically one of the few times you get that sort of dotted rhythm. Yeah, if not the only time. And it's just a different flavour for just a few notes, but worth bringing out. Great, and then we get into the last section, which I think is quite interesting. The C part of the C section of this Pavan is quite interesting. It starts quite slow, fairly static, and then starts to move as the chords get broken up and the voices get separated slightly, so it starts to sound a little bit like it's hocketing. All quite static here. So remember to hold on to those chords for as long as you can, make it smooth. Hold on to that bass E for as long as you can, and then here it starts to move. And I like to slightly fall into that a little bit, but it's entirely up to you whether you do. I think a slightly controlled fall into it is fine as long as you do hold it back and make up for the rubato at the end. Okay, great. And then when this happens in the divisions, it's not very static at all, but we still end up with that rolling forward feeling. So the thing that I'd like to look at next is in bar 35. And it's really important there to get through that grippo and end up on the F minor chord. It's very easy with these little trillos to only focus on the notes that you're aiming for, to only focus on that F that you're arriving at. But we really need to make it sound like there's a chord, there's a full chord, and also we're not afraid of arriving on it, and that it's very easy to get to it. And those things in combination can be quite difficult. So, and again, hold on to that G bass as long as you can. Practice that slowly if you need to. But make sure that when you get... so if you need to build it up like that, build it up, but make sure the arrival is prompt. Good, and then the next bit, next couple of bars are a little bit tricky in that there's a bit of right hand fingering that you've got to focus on. We've got to be aware that our first finger is doing a lot of the work here. Okay, so every time there's a new voice arriving, that's rising, that needs to come from your first finger, and we need to really hear that first note because it's quite important. It's an entry in a way. And it's always that first finger. So play that slowly and try accenting those notes. Okay, I say accent them as an exercise, and then obviously reduce the accent as you need to when you come to play it properly. But it's worth just sitting there and working those out and go through them slowly. And don't be afraid to jump down with the first finger to a lower string and make sure that you're playing with full tone. It doesn't matter if it all goes wrong when you're practicing. Okay, just really, when you really hear that line come out and it's your first finger that's doing the work, it sounds great. So yeah, don't be afraid of playing stuff wrong whilst you're practicing. It's worth it in the end. Great, and then the last thing I want to look at is just this final bar. And then here, we have this little flourish at the end that's quite fast. Okay, which you can play the final chord in any way you like, but it's really nice if that flourish still sounds easy, but also quite impressive. So practice that slowly, make sure that you've got it under the fingers, and play it into the string as we were talking about before. So this is another example where you could, for just a moment, tense your hand up just to slightly get that faster speed. Yeah? Great, okay, well I hope you enjoy this one. It's a really great piece, and yeah, see you in the next intermediate lesson.